I've got this hideous secret that I know is gonna make me lose my family, and I have to keep it hidden. But at the same time, I can't live like this anymore. So my name is Jimmy Bangash. I am a gay ex-Muslim, and I work as an activist for organisations such as the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. It's the main organisation that I do work with. And then also I work as the resident life coach for another organisation called Free Hearts, Free Minds. Which is a really good question about what it meant to me. I don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. So it's kind of making me see it from a different perspective. I think when I was growing up, I was Muslim. Like there was no conversation or doubt about that. So when I think about what it meant to me, looking back, it would have been part of my identity. Yeah, just like you were born as a Muslim, and so you were a Muslim, and that was the way it was always going to be. And I guess what that means was that you were part of a community. Yeah, like my family was Muslim, the people I lived around were Muslim. But because I grew up in London, obviously I was exposed to many different communities. And at school, we would go to school with Muslims and non-Muslims as well. So the religion was something I didn't necessarily enjoy, actually. I found that actually a lot about it was quite prohibitive. Like it seemed like anything that was fun was haram. And also there seemed to be a lot of restriction that comes with Islam, actually. There's a lot of, you mustn't do this, you mustn't do that. And the things that you can do must be done in a certain way. So even down to how you might drink your water should be done in an ideal way that was suggested by the Prophet at some point in time. So I found it was a lot of rules and a lot of regulations around it. In addition to that, there was also, this onerous need to pray all the time in a way that I found actually quite monotonous and rigid. And I think what was also a struggle around that was we didn't pray in English and we didn't pray in Pashto, which is the language that my parents speak. We would pray in Arabic and you'd read the Quran in Arabic. So I think what it meant to me was certainly it was a part of my identity, but it wasn't something that I found particularly enriching as an individual. I found it actually quite challenging and also quite punitive. So the way that God was often described to me was this God of fear. Like he's going to punish you. He's always watching what you're doing. And if you step out of line, he's going to punish you. And he's not just going to punish you for a bit. He's really going to punish you in some hideous ways because within Islam, and I don't think this is necessarily as well enunciated in other religions, but the punishments that are going to happen to you are very well articulated. And they're very colourful. They're very fully drawn out for you to be able to see in vivid images. So to give you an example, I remember if you didn't do all of your prayers when you were dead in the grave, like a serpent will come and bite you. And there was another punishment in the grave where your grave would close up so tight that one rib cage would smash into the other rib cage. And you would be feeling all of this pain. So the way that Christian people kind of describe their God now, like this God of love and this God of compassion, is not a God that I was familiar with in terms of Islam as an Abrahamic faith. It was very much, you must do this, you must do that. If you don't do this, then this is the torture that awaits you. Yeah. And I think the second part of your question, so what it meant to me was, this core component of my identity, which wasn't something that I'd chosen, but was just a part of me. And it gave me a group identity, both in terms of my family and the wider Muslim community. It was something I had a dissonance with because of its punitive nature, yeah, and also its rigidity that definitely put me at odds with it. But I think the reasons that I left the religion fall into two main areas. So the first one was looking at the difference between my brothers and me and my dad and how we were treated and what we were allowed to do compared to what my sisters and my mum were allowed to do and how they were treated. And that when I would ask why is it they can't come to the cinema with us? And the answer I'd be given is, well, because they're girls. And I'd be waiting for the rest of that sentence, but realized that that was the whole sentence. So it's simply just because they're girls, they couldn't do this. Why can't they do that? Because they're girls. And there was no follow-up to that, you know? And that really had me questioning what was okay and what was truthful and what was just in the religion. In addition to that, I grew up in a house with quite a lot of domestic violence, actually. So my dad was frequently violent towards my mum. And I remember challenging him on that from an Islamic perspective and saying, actually, you shouldn't be beating your wife. That's not a particularly Islamic thing to do. And I remember my dad saying to me, no, it says I can hit my wife. And I was like, and I was very young at the time. Yeah, very young. So like maybe like 10, 11, 12, something like that. And I thought it was absurd that he would say that Allah had given him permission to beat his wife. And you know, I guess I thought you're going to get punished for saying that. And so I was like, you know, that's ridiculous. And then my dad showed me where it said you can hit your wife. And I was like, oh my God, this is actually crazy. Like, why on earth would some deity grant permission for violence against one's spouse? That didn't make any sense to me. And I think people who grow up in domestic violence, you know, certain things it can manifest for each of us. So you can have several family members and it manifests differently for each of you. And for me, there was always this constant sense of injustice. Like, how comes my mum gets to be treated like this? How comes the whole community knows that my mum is being treated like this? How comes the one time I called the police came and treated it as a cultural issue? Because back then that's how the police would have treated these things. And now God is saying, well, actually, you can hit your wife. And when you think about it from that context of God saying, you can hit your wife, and then there's hadith saying a man should never be questioned about whether he beats his wife or how he beats his wife, well, then you understand more the silence in our community around domestic violence and why people don't challenge it and why no one steps up and says, actually, this isn't okay. And where we see traction around that in Western communities, we see less traction around that in places like Saudi or Pakistan, etc. Because, you know, it's theologically embedded within the Quran for you. So the treatment of women, the misogyny, and how it manifests in my house particularly had me start questioning whether this was actually the truth. And then the second component was, as I started to get older and I became more aware that I was gay, that was another area that was very challenging for me. And I had to start assessing, like, actually, is there something inherently wrong with me and other gay people? And for a long time, I believed there was. You know, I thought, actually, yeah, there's something wrong with you. This is some sort of sickness or malady that you've got. It's a test from God as well. And when I would speak to people at the mosque or family members or any Muslim person, you know, they would all concur that actually this is a sin. It's not just a sin like maybe stealing. It's actually quite a disgusting sin. Gays are subhuman. They're not like real people. God says that they should be executed. You can even get into a dialogue, like a scholastic dialogue, around the way to kill your gay. So should he be thrown off a building? Should he be hung? Should he be decapitated? Should he be stoned to death? Like there's even a theological and scholastic conversation about the appropriate way to kill a gay person. Like that's how mental it is. And that's how hideous it's seen by our community. So for a long time struggling with that and initially thinking, actually I deserve to die and gay people deserve to die. And rather paradoxically, but not anomalous. So when I speak to other gay ex-Muslims and even gay Muslims, sometimes and frequently you end up diving more into the religion, because if you go into it deep enough, maybe God will cure you of this. You know, if you do more prayer, if you submit more, if you deny that part of you that is a test, well then God will remove it at some stage. And this is what people will tell you as well. So you might speak to someone and say, oh, my friend is gay, because you never talk about yourself, right? My friend is gay, blah, blah, blah. Oh, he should pray more. He should get married to a woman. God will help him if he prays more. It's just a test. It's not okay. It's absolutely haram. And then you would always be struck with, you can't be gay and Muslim. So this forced apostasy, even if you wanted to be Muslim and gay, that wasn't an option. And I know that there's a lot of challenge to that now, but back when I was growing up, that wasn't a thing. You know, like it was just like, you can't be gay and Muslim, pick one or the other. So understanding that actually inherently within this faith is both misogyny and homophobia. And we see those two go hand in hand all across the world, yeah? So then using a more critical eye on Islam and putting it under the lens more, I was like, this is actually nonsense. It really is nonsense. And I think if I didn't have that dissonance, I don't know if I would have reached a point where I stepped out of the religion. Like if I didn't have such a flagrant disregard for women justified by Islam, and if I didn't have such a hatred of gay people justified by Islam, and rather I grew up in a family where everyone was really quite liberal in terms of their application of Islam, maybe it wouldn't have appeared as a challenge to me. But because I grew up in quite a conservative family, and there was this understanding of what the theology is, yeah, and the community was the same, there was a huge dissonance for me between what I thought women should be allowed to do compared to what Islam said, and what I thought about gay people after I had unbridled myself from the toxicity of Islamic homophobia. Then I realized actually that's not how gay people should be treated. I mean, the whole religion, right? So I think, you know, there's absurdity and then there's sinister, isn't there? So I think let's go with absurdity first and then look at sinister. So the things that I think were absurd was that in this vast galaxy where we can't decide whether it's expanding or contracting or the same size, sorry, in this vast universe with however many galaxies within it, on a minor planet circling a minor sun is this population of humanoids. And the creator of all of this is concerned about what I do with my genitals. I think that is mind-blowingly absurd, yeah? But I did think that was true. Like God cared whether you had sex before marriage or not. That was really important to him. And he cared about whether you had sex with the same gender or the opposite gender. So to think that somebody had created all of this wonderfulness that is life, but was worried about what you do with your penis, I think that's actually really, really absurd. Yeah. The other thing was hell as a concept, and hell kind of reaches two areas. So it goes from absurd, but there's something really quite sinister about it. So the idea that you know, as human beings, our idea of morality and justice is that if somebody commits a crime, well, then the punishment should be proportional to that crime. So if you, as you know, if you do GBH, if you assault somebody, well, then you go to jail for a number of years. But if you do murder, well, then you go to jail for more years. So that seemed quite, you know, quite like a logical way of approaching behavior that was counterproductive or evil behavior. But this idea then that what God was going to do was give you 100 years, say at best, to live on this planet. And if over that 100 years you messed up, let's say you just killed people every day for 100 years, or you didn't even believe in him, or you knew he was true, but you were like, screw you, God, I'm not going to believe in you, you can kiss my ass. The idea that he was then going to torture you for eternity for messing up for 100 years is just absolutely absurd. And it seemed devoid of any reasonableness as an entity to be able to do that. And certainly didn't seem divine if within our mortal selves we can decide that actually punishment should be proportional to the crime, but then some divine creature that has made our mortal selves couldn't seem to make that same deduction itself. That to me seemed really absurd. And hell is quite sinister in a way, because if what you're saying is that this divine being, which has created us all, and then given a select few of us the truth as the message, like these chosen Islamic people who are fortunately enough to be born into the faith, if our God is saying to us, actually, if people transgress, I'm going to torture them. And I'm not going to torture them with a viewpoint to enacting or facilitating rehabilitation. Yeah. So when we have a prison population in the UK or across the West, what you do is you put people in jail because they're a threat to society, but you work to rehabilitate so that those people come out and then can be functioning members of society. But the chosen people, Muslims, their God isn't torturing people with any end goal of rehabilitating them or helping them get back to becoming better people within society. He's just torturing them because he wants to torture them. Like he could decide to just end their lives and for them never to have any recollection or existence of that life because they failed this test. But instead, he decides he's going to torture them. He's not torturing them for a while until they learn a lesson from it and then allowing them to progress to heaven or have a second chance at this test whilst remembering what they went through. No, what he's doing is deciding to torture people just for the sake of inflicting pain. Now, we know that if the Muslim community thinks about Guantanamo and what they see as torture in that, they're outraged by it. Because as human beings, we've got to a point in our lives or our evolution where we say, actually, torture is not okay. It's not a mechanism that we use, yeah? Because we say, actually, it's not a right. But somehow, we're absolutely fine with this idea of Islamic torture. And I think that's why hell is really quite sinister and as a concept. In addition to that, I wonder what it does to us as a community to believe that actually our most divine being, who has made us all and has given us guidance on how we should behave in a right and proper way, that creature endorses torture. That creature endorses inflicting pain for the sake of inflicting pain, with no desire to get an outcome for it. And I wonder whether that speaks to the violence in our community. Yeah, so when my family found out, I didn't tell them I was gay. But in many ways, I was doing my best to be found out. So like looking back now, as a man who lives a very authentic and enriched life, I can look back and see that 20 years ago I was dyeing my hair blonde, wearing very fitted vests around the house. So so there was this inner struggle within me, which was like, I've got this hideous secret that I know is gonna make me lose my family, and I have to keep it hidden. But at the same time, I can't live like this anymore. And so when I think about how I used to dress and how I used to color my hair, I can see now that that was some part of me, some subconscious part of me, screaming to articulate who I really was. Yeah. So my family found out that I was gay, and then it was very horrible. It was a very horrible time, very horrible and challenging time, actually. So initially, a couple of my brothers said to me, "Look, we know that you're gay." And so I was like, "Okay." And they were like, we don't want anything to do with you. You can live in the house, but we don't want anything to do with you. And we're not going to talk to you anymore. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So as soon as that conversation happened, I contacted a friend and I said, listen, they know, and I need to get out of this house now. It's not a good idea for me to be staying here. And I used to work part-time for an organization, and I was studying at uni full-time. And so I contacted that organization when I was working part-time, and I said, if you want your full-time jobs going, and I was quite well thought of as an employee, and so they managed to find me a full-time job. And initially at home, when my brother stopped talking to me, what I think they thought was going to happen was that I'd really feel isolated. But I think by the point I was probably about 22, 23, and from about the age of 12, I was like, you're going to lose your family. And I think I'd started pulling back anyway in those relationships, understanding that, well, I'm going to lose these relationships at some point in my life. Also, there's a very real threat of violence here when they do find out, because they'd been very violent towards one of my sisters, and there was a lot of violence in our house generally. So when they initially said, we're not talking to you anymore, I think for about a week or 2 weeks, nothing changed in the house. So I used to just go up straight to my bedroom and stay there anyway. So all that happened was I'd go straight up to my bedroom and stay there anyway. And then I think when everyone realized this isn't coercive enough, he's not changing his behavior in any way, 3 of my brothers knocked on the door one day at my bedroom, and I was working on an assignment for uni. And I opened the door, and my brother was like, can I come in? It was my oldest brother. And I was like, sure. But because my head was in my assignment, I didn't think to be on guard. I was just like in my assignment. And then my brother came in, and I kind of took my chair facing the computer. And then after him came another brother, and then after him came another brother. And I didn't know 3 of them were around the corner. This is quite a hard thing to talk about, actually, because the fear of that moment, it was one of the times in my life I felt the most afraid. So I was sat in a chair, and 3 of my brothers had positioned themselves around me. And then they were just really horrible. They just said a lot of mean stuff, like, you're disgusting, we can't believe we've been sharing the same knife and fork as you, you're just, just really, really mean stuff. And I think for me, all I was worried about was, is this going to turn violent? And if it turns violent, how the hell do I get out of this room? Because they'd positioned themselves in a way where one was by the door, one was in front of me, and one was on that side. And I think for a lot of gay people, you learn to act quite fast in life. You learn to be conscious of whether you're crossing your legs like this, or whether you're crossing your legs like this, whether you're sitting with your shoulders back, or whether your hands are in your lap. So I'd become quite good at navigating fear and not letting it show on my face. And in that incident, I remember making sure that I didn't look afraid when it was happening. And just when the insults started coming, I thought, okay, well, this is actually quite good, because whilst people are screaming insults, they're not being physically violent. And then that altercation ended with, so you better get the fuck out of this house, basically. And I said, listen, well, I just need another week. Actually, I've already put mechanisms in process since the first conversation to get out. And then I left about a week later after that, and moved in with a friend, and we'd got a place. I left uni, I didn't get to finish uni, and went full-time in my job. And then we didn't really have much contact, actually. We kind of had nothing to do with my brothers and one of my sisters, who was also really outraged by it. My other sister had known I was gay for a while because I told her, and she couldn't really handle it, but was doing her best, but wasn't threatening about it. And she'd always been a black sheep anyway, because she had gone and married a man of her choice and such. So she'd already bent the rules, so I kind of felt a bit safer telling her. And then my mum didn't have a clue as to what was going on. All of a sudden, she just knew Jimmy was moving out of the house. And obviously in our community, that's not something you really do unless you're getting married, in which case you might move your wife into the house anyway. So she was a bit puzzled by it all, but no one had told her why. And then what happened was I started working really hard. I think so sometimes when you get ostracized from your family, it can feel like you have nothing else and you only have yourself. And that can certainly lead you down a road of depression or anxiety, but it can also make you feel like, well, this is it. I've got nothing else. I have to make this work. And I think that was more what happened with me. It was like, actually, I haven't got a family anymore. There's no safety net. I have to start making a life of my own. And I kind of threw myself into my work and my career. And so it wasn't long before I got a promotion from an assistant manager position to a manager position in the store that I was working in. And the new store they wanted me to take was in the geographical region of where my family lived. So I'd moved to the other side of London, and the new shop that they had was in this region. And then when my family found out I was moving back to that area to run a store, it was like a lingerie store. So they weren't happy about a guy working in that kind of environment. But at that point, it got even worse. So they were giving me like death threats on the phone, saying they were going to come to my shop and beat me up. They were going to wait outside or come into the store and just mess up the shop, or that they were going to get a hitman to come and kill me. It got really, really ugly for a period of time. And then I think because I had some familiarity around how honor violence works, and I'd done some reading around it, I became increasingly aware that they were trying to isolate me. So what I did was contact the police and contact other people who are friends and say, look, this is what they're trying to do. And when that happened, that was when they kind of backed off. Yeah. So it's a good question. I think when people ask questions like this, I wish I could give them a lovely box that they could stack on top of another box and be like, oh, this is how it all fitted together. But I think, our psyche is so much more complex than that. And things work on a conscious and a subconscious level, and we're not always aware of what's happening in which way. So I think, as a young guy who was like 13, 14, beginning to understand that I was gay and not wanting to be gay. So, that internal denial that so many gay people go through around, oh, I don't fancy him, I just want to be like him, yeah? And that's how we might legitimize our attraction towards another guy, and just deny ourselves that it was actually occurring. So, and it's important to note as well, an added complexity to this is that when I was growing up, actually British society was quite homophobic. So even non-Islamic society was actually quite homophobic. Yeah. So when I was coming to terms with my sexuality in terms of accepting I was gay, which isn't the same as accepting that it's okay to be gay, but like just having to face up to the fact that, okay, this is pretty disgusting, but it is the fact that it is true. I am gay. Yeah. I think getting to that point, no, it didn't feel like I was stepping out of Islam, actually. I felt like that this was, I was told this was a test. I didn't know stepping out of Islam was even an option at all. Like, so that didn't occur to me. And I would say that I wasn't comfortably grounded as an ex-Muslim until much later on in my life, and because I didn't understand that that was an option. So I think coming to terms with the fact that I was gay, having to deal with the turmoil of what that meant, well, actually, God kind of hates you, yeah, and if you act on this, which you haven't done yet, but having an awareness that there's no way I was going to be abstinent from it for the rest of my life. I didn't have that kind of strength, and uh, and so that didn't push me out. What I think happened and how I ended up leaving was when I hit university. So when I hit uni, and then you're exposed to gay people who want lugging this baggage along and doing self-flagellation, have this whole toxic relationship with their sexuality. And plus my uni was in central London, so like Regent Street, which isn't that far from Soho, so there's a whole gay community there. And oh my God, these people are so okay with their sexuality, even though British society is really quite homophobic. And then sneaking off to gay clubs, yeah, and meeting people in gay clubs and being like, oh my God, like this club has got like hundreds of people in it, and there's no way that you can position these people as being messed up or there being something wrong with them. They're functioning members of society, arguably more functioning than some of the members of my family, right? And arguably more functioning than members of my community, some of whom have no interest in ever getting a job or working for a living. We're just making a career out of being on benefits. But here were gay people working hard, contributing to society, paying taxes, making sure that they were standing up for their contribution to the world. And you're going to tell me that simply by being a Muslim, you're better than these people who are, doing their best to make the world a better place and make sure that society functions, some of which are financing your ability to stay at home whilst they wake up at 6 a.m. to go to work. Like when these things started coming into my mind, that's really when I started to be like, actually, I don't know if I'm Muslim anymore. I really don't know if I'm Muslim anymore. And I remember in that time period, because it would have started manifesting in the way that I dressed, me dyeing my hair. I used to work out at the gym and wear really fitted, like vest tops and such. And I remember my brother saying to me in front of my dad, in one of the many arguments about whatever we were arguing about on that day, but do you even believe in God? And I was like, probably not in the way that you believe in it. Yeah, because I was still trying to understand, do I even believe in God? I don't think I believe in this Allah guy who just wants to torture everyone and hates gays and women. Like, certainly don't believe in him anymore. Doesn't make any sense. And nobody had ever put me on the spot like that. So when I'd meet other gay people, they would say, oh, where are you from? And I'd be like, oh, I'm Pakistani. They'd be like, oh, are you Muslim? And I'd be like, I was born Muslim. So that became an answer to that question. Was whenever anyone asked me, are you Muslim? I'd start saying, I was born Muslim. I was born Muslim. And I think that is an articulation of, I don't really know where I am now. Like it was definitely a way of addressing that without saying, I don't know if I'm Muslim at the moment, which just sounds like you're a bit loopy. So when my brother asked that question and I said, I don't think I believe in God the way that you believe in God. I don't think I believe in this whole Allah stuff. And then seeing my dad's response to that, like my dad for about 3 days was just pacing up and down the house in in a bit of a daze, yeah, like that his son had actually said that. And then my sister said to me, "Why did you say that?" And he was like, you should really be asking my other brother why he asked me that question in front of Dad in the middle of a heated argument. Like, what was the purpose of that? And I think my brother was meanwhile getting more Islamic. Yeah. Uh, and uh, and uh, and so then my sister was like, just go and tell Dad you were joking, like that you were winding your brother up because it was an argument. And for peace of mind, I did. I went and said to my dad, "Don't worry, it was just a joke." And he was like, "Okay, cool." And even that speaks to like the levels of denial within Islam. That my dad was so readily to accept, "Okay, cool, you were joking, it's fine. We can all move on now," instead of interrogating that information. Like, why would somebody say that and actually then come back 3 days later and say that they're only joking? But I think a lot of Islam is about coercion. And so my dad's passive aggressive pacing around the house in the state of depression or whatever he was trying to articulate is a way of coercing any dissonance or any dissent and making you conform. And I think when you have a deity that says it's okay to torture people in order to just torture them, I wonder whether it sets up a paradigm for people within any behavior, within which any behavior to coerce people to act in the way that Islam says is acceptable. And we see that manifest in like emotional abuse, ostracism, violence, honor violence within our community. So I think initially when I started saying to people, I was born Muslim, I don't think I'd left Islam then actually. I don't think I had. And I think for many years I kind of, had lost this family who was dysfunctional as it was still loving in many ways, yeah? And so for there was a lot of my period of my life where I was trying to kind of navigate the trauma of that, of just having all of the people who are supposed to love you ripped away and then having them issue death threats against you. Like there was a lot of trauma there to kind of work my way through. And I think there was a lot of maladaptive avoidance techniques to avoid looking at that in my life. So things that weren't particularly healthy, like interactions with alcohol and such that maybe were drinking more than I should have done, and I think sometimes, like now as a therapist, when we see issues around substance misuse, one of the questions we ask is, what are you trying to anesthetize? And so there was this sense of pain and rejection that I was trying to anesthetize. But whether that, what is that about? Is that about leaving Islam, or is that about being rejected because you're not Muslim, or is that about being rejected because you're gay? And I think back then, certainly those two were entwined, like from my family perspective, because you were gay, you were not Muslim. So get out, right? It's not an option. With now you have gay Muslims, like that really wasn't a thing back then. So I think in terms of your question, so in terms of the detriment of leaving Islam, what was bad first, I think, before we look at the benefits, was this sense of being lost and being so lost that I didn't even want to look at how lost I was, because it was so overwhelmingly intimidating. It was so devoid and desolate of any emotional succor that if I were to look at it, I would fall apart. So, I threw myself into my work. First of all, I was trying to just get involved with work and climb that, get noticed by my company so that then I could become a manager, which would help me be more financially stable. And then I think when that happened, then, I kind of entered into the party scene, the gay party scene, and got lost in there for a number of years as well. But then once I got to a point where I was like, actually, I don't believe in this, and it's okay to not believe in this. And that, I'd say, was happening around my 30s. Yeah. Then things became better. So once I could be like, actually, and you know, I have to be quite thankful, because if it wasn't for organizations like the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, who are like, it's okay to be Muslim and then not be Muslim, like that's absolutely fine. If it wasn't like watching videos with Mariam Namazi and Ayan Hirsi Ali, who were saying all of this stuff that I had thought in many disparate ways, you know, like I'd have a thought about over how ridiculous the misogyny was, and a thought about how ridiculous hell was, a thought about the impact of the misogyny on women in our community, how ridiculous the homophobia was, how the two come together to ensure that men who are straight in our community get to say and do anything they want. But I'd never put these thoughts together in any coherent narrative. And then when I listened to a YouTube video of Ayan Hirsi Ali saying all of this, and was like, somebody had taken all of these disparate thoughts in my mind, things that I'd been too scared to say as a child or as a teenager, and was articulating it all just brilliantly. Something for me shifted there. It was like, oh my God, this is okay. And I think that was definitely a beginning of my healing journey. When you hear somebody saying things that are forbidden and they're okay, you know, so like I was constantly like, is Ayan Hirsi Ali, is she actually still alive? Or has a lightning bolt got her yet? Is Mariam Namazi, is she actually alive? Like, or has something happened to her? So hearing these people just talk about things I'd always wanted to say, and not being afraid at pointing out the injustices in our community that derived from Islamic theology and Sharia, really allowed me to start healing and being more authentic in myself. So I'd become far more authentic about my sexuality, having stepped out of a Muslim community or been kicked out of a Muslim community. But I hadn't allowed myself to articulate my critique of Islam ever. And that only started happening in my 30s, when I started seeing actually other ex-Muslim people saying what they really thought about this religion and the impact that it had. And I think that's probably why I'm an activist now, actually, is understanding how important that is. And also, there aren't really many gay ex-Muslims out there having this conversation. And I think there's a additional nuance when you put the homosexuality into the apostasy equation as well. Yeah. So now, in terms of the benefits, going through all of that horror, it's just freedom. Like, I have such an authentic life now. It's you know, like I guess when people ask me what my life is like because they know about the story, I genuinely feel like my life is a joy. It's such a pleasure to be me. I'm really able to look in the mirror in the morning and respect the man that I see looking back at me. And then a lot of the work that I do with people is helping people to be able to step into a position of authenticity, helping them to navigate these difficult terrains between themselves and their families, how to renegotiate these boundaries and be assertive, how to reconnect with health and well-being and not suffer from depression and anxiety because of all of the stuff that we go through due to Islamic theology. It's a good question, and I get asked it often. So, there's a desire, isn't there, for me to lean in and just say quite glibly, there's nothing wrong with your sexuality, and it's absolutely fine to question your religion. Yeah? And I think that's quite a textbook answer to give to people. And I don't know how useful that is, actually. So when I was struggling with my sexuality, having someone tell me it's okay to be gay is not the same as realizing it's okay to be gay. And I think how we often come to these realizations is through company, actually. So my advice is connect with people. So if you're having issues or questions around your sexuality, if you think that you might be gay or lesbian or anything else, connect with other people who are having those same questions, and connect with people who are gay, and connect with people who are bi, and have the conversations. Because I think often, as with being an ex-Muslim, is you're made to feel like you're the only person who's going through that. And when you connect with other people, the commonality gives you some level of succour. It gives you some level of peace. Because initially it might feel really isolating, but when you know that other people are going through the same thing, there's a benefit to that. One feels less alone. Yeah. So I always think that the best thing to do is contact other people who are going through the same thing. And there's nuances to that. So if you're ex-Muslim and you're gay, you might want to contact something like Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain. If you're questioning about your religion and you're gay or straight, you might want to contact someone like Muslimish in the States. And if you think you're gay but you're Muslim, you've got no questions around, or you're still questioning your faith but you don't want to leave it, then there's gay Muslim organizations that you can contact as well, like Hidayah, or I can't remember the other one in the UK, but that's an example. So we live in an era, one where the world has never been so small in terms of our ability to communicate with each other. So whether you're watching this video in, I don't know, Saudi or Pakistan, you can still contact organizations in the UK. Yeah? And you live in a time now where enough of us have stepped forward and created organizations that there's a space somewhere for you to speak to someone who's going through the similar kind of thing. And I think that's the most important thing in terms of what I would say is just reach out and connect. It's unnecessary and unhelpful to try and navigate this by yourself. It's quite interesting. So when you say, is there a place for homosexuality within Islam? There's a passivity in that question, almost as if gays have to wait for Islam to grant them a place. And I think that's often how we think about it, actually. Has Islam got this place for gays who want to be Muslim? And I think when one fights for one's rights, it's not about passivity, it's about activism. Yeah? And in alignment with activism is action. So what you're seeing now is gay Muslims crafting a space within Islam for themselves, regardless of what anybody else might think, regardless of what ex-Muslims might think, regardless of what gay ex-Muslims might think, regardless of what straight Muslims might think. Gay Muslims are now saying, actually, you don't own this religion, straight people, particularly I think towards the straight men. You don't own this, you don't get to dictate the interpretation anymore. You don't get to quote hadith at us, you don't get to quote the story of Lot at us through your interpretation. And what we're going to do is say, we are gay, we are Muslim, we don't think the story of Lot has anything to do with homosexuality, has far more to do with deplorable behavior and standards. And that's why lots of people were wiped out. It wasn't just about being gay. And generally what goes hand in hand with that interpretation is hadiths are not all authentic, and the ones that say kill gays are rather conveniently inauthentic hadiths and weak chain narrations. So I think when we say, has Islam got a place for gays, I think gay Muslims are saying, we have a place for Islam, and we're not going to relinquish that, actually. But hand in hand with that seems to be going, and also please accept us, to the wider Muslim community. And I think, we've seen that battle take place within Christianity, and gays have become more accommodated within the Christian community. So it's possible that the same thing could happen within the Muslim community, though I do think there's a lot more resistance towards it. So the last Channel 4 poll that was done through a reputable polling organization said that 52% of British Muslims polled felt that homosexuality should be criminalized, and 47% said that gay people shouldn't be allowed to be teachers. Yeah, and then you've also seen the protests in Birmingham by Muslim people against LGBT education. So there's a lot of resistance to it within our community, and I think actually it's a burgeoning struggle, and as time goes by, particularly in the West, I think you'll see more and more Muslims becoming lenient in their viewpoint towards homosexuality. And I think that's on a societal level. In a theological basis, if you're asking me, does Islam have space for homosexuality? Islam has as much space for homosexuality as it does female imams. Yeah, that would be my position on it. And I think in order to reconcile your desire to be gay and Muslim, one needs to turn a blind eye to a lot of condemnation, explicit condemnation of gay people. In addition to that, you then need to throw up some mental gymnastics of somehow in the 21st century and at the end of the 20th century, we established the correct interpretation of the story of Lot. But that for the whole time before that, where it was interpreted as God killing off gay people for being gay, like somehow that had allowed us all to misinterpret that for a very long period of time, and also it allowed all of the gay people to be thrown off buildings or stoned to death and decapitated, or in Iran hung. And God was kind of okay with that, knowing that at some point in the 21st century some of us would get the right message, and then you're going to submit to that deity as if it's divine and perfect. I think you really have to do a lot of engineering around the cognitive dissonance and turning a blind eye to things if what you're going to say is Islam isn't homophobic. That's a really good question. So I kind of define myself as an atheist, actually. And then, so I've been meditating for probably 15 years now, I think 13, 14, 15 years. Something happens when you have been meditating for a while, and even just talking about it is starting to happen now. So something happens when you meditate for a while, where when you enter into meditation, this warm glow just kind of floods your body. It's a beautiful feeling, and I don't know how else to articulate it than other to say a warm glow floods my body, and it makes me smile. Like I can't. It would take a lot of conscious effort to switch this smile off now, because I'm kind of feeling that glow. So what I'm conscious about is it would be nice to think that that's some kind of connection with the divine. And sometimes when I'm meditating, I'm like, oh, there's that oneness feeling that comes along with meditation. But then I'm also present to, this is just your human brain, which has been meditating for a long time, probably has had some neurological and structural changes because of meditation. So there's research out there that say the way that your brain is shaped or behaves when you are a regular meditator changes. Yeah, your capacity to withstand stresses like anxiety, depression, etc., expands. Yeah, and certain parts of your brain become more active and other parts become less active. It generally works in your favor. So there's moments where I'm meditating and I'm like, oh, there's more than this out there. But I'm also just conscious, like, that's your brain as a human being. It plays tricks on you. This is a beautiful feeling, and it's easy to get swept away with it. Yeah. So when I think about, is there something divine? It's in those moments when I'm meditating that I feel like this euphoria, maybe that's a better word for the warm glow, this sense of euphoria, this sense of balance, this sense that everything's going to be okay, no matter what, everything's going to be okay. And as I say that, I'm conscious that that sounds quite spiritual and that it sounds quite uh, religious in some ways. So I define myself as an atheist because there's no evidence anywhere that I've been given that tells me actually that there is a God out there who, certainly not in this Abrahamic way, who's like watching us scoring up our points and stuff like that. And when I say certainly not in this Abrahamic way, actually, certainly not in any way have I seen evidence that there is a God out there. A part of me wants to believe, like, yeah, it'd be nice if there was something greater than us out there, but there's distinction between what I want to believe and what I've given evidence to believe are two totally different things. I'm quite comfortable saying I don't know if there's a God, but it seems highly unlikely. Yeah, that's probably my position at the moment. And I'm also very comfortable with the idea that where I am today might not be where I am in 10 years' time. And I think that's a positive rather than a negative. No one's ever asked me that question before. And I can think of, as you asked that question, 10 other people who are activist colleagues who would answer this question so much better than me. So someone like Armin, Navabi, Yasmin Mohammed, Ali Malik, they're a lot more, probably better positioned to answer that. Do you, I think, is compatible with science? Well, it's not, is it, really? I mean, if what you're saying is that the scientific method starts with maybe like a hypothesis and then seeks to establish the truth about that hypothesis, but isn't committed one way or the other. Like, here's a hypothesis, we're either going to prove it true or we're going to prove it false. Doesn't really matter which one of those is. And once we've proved it true or false, through replication, we will be able to consistently prove that truth. Yeah, through whatever experiment or measure we take, we'll always be able to show this is false. See, this is still false. 10 years later, this is still false. And I think Islam is, and I just say, I hate the way you say Islam. I just want to throw this out there because not many people know it. So when I say Islam, I say Islam. when people of Arab origin say Islam, they say Islam. And it really grates me. It takes me back to how oppressive that religion is, that even in our enunciation of words, it creeps in. But that's a complete aside. So if Islam is saying, this is truth, however you experiment, you must ensure you land on, this is truth. That's anti-scientific. So thank you for the opportunity to talk about this, actually. So because I work as a therapist and I work as a life coach, and I'm able to see how transformative that is for people, particularly I think for myself, I do a lot of work with people with chronic conditions. So it might be like depression or anxiety, anything else around mental health. So watching people navigate through that using the work that I do to get to a place where they have a happier, more productive life is really important. And so I wanted to do that kind of work with ex-Muslim people because so many of us go through shunning and ostracism, and that leads to mental health issues, like when you lose your whole family, or even if you haven't lost your whole family, if you're living in the closet, like what that does to your mental health. And even if you're not living in the closet, just questioning that paradigm of Islam and the guilt that comes with questioning that paradigm, and how that guilt and that shame impacts our mental health, is something I wanted to create a space for, and people that I wanted to work with, so we could help them get well. And so my colleague Yasmin Mohammed was in Canada thinking the exact same thing, because she's a very well-known activist, and a lot of people from Muslim majority countries were contacting her and telling her their stories. And I think it was beginning to take a toll on her in terms of secondary trauma, like reading all of these stories. Somehow, we ended up being put in touch with each other through a mutual friend. We both, Yaz wanted to start something about mental health for ex-Muslims. I wanted to do something around mental health with ex-Muslims. We jumped onto Skype, and when we had a conversation, I mentioned to Yaz that I wanted to do it with people in London, which is where I am. And then when she articulated the struggle of ex-Muslims in Muslim majority countries, and how you might be going through mental health issues there, and you can't go to see a psychotherapist because you won't be able to say to them, my world is falling apart because I don't believe in this religion, because in so many countries you could be imprisoned for that, or you could be executed for that. Once she articulated that struggle, we kind of agreed, well, actually what we need to do is prioritize people in Muslim majority countries so they've got someone to speak to. So we launched Free Hearts, Free Minds, and what I do there is people contact the organization. We have a bit of a waiting list, actually, so there's a number of people waiting to work with us. And we organize for 6 sessions over Skype, 6 one-hour sessions, and it's coaching, therapeutic work. So it's really not kind of deep-rooted talking about your past psychotherapy type work. It's very much, okay, this is where you are, and how can we help you get a grip back on your life and start shaping your life so that it works for you. Yeah. So when people usually come to us, quite frequently they're suicidal and they haven't really got the capacity to engage with some of the other well-known ex-Muslim organizations. Like, that feels a bit too much for them, and they need a lot more in terms of the one-to-one support, and giving them 6 sessions over Skype where we talk and about what's going on for them. We might do even simple things like goal setting for them for the end of the 6 sessions, helping them to look at how they can assert themselves in their life, how they can remove the locus of control or their agency from external and bring it back internally, making them feel empowered as individuals and feeling like they can instrument change in their life. So often we have people who just when they start working with us are in a point where they either don't know how they're going to carry on living, or the only way they feel like they can carry on living is if they get out of that country. And by the end of the 6 weeks or the 6 sessions that we've had together, they're in a completely different space. We've had people say, well, actually, I don't feel like I need to leave this country anymore. So I am ex-Muslim, surrounded by Muslims. But you know what? We all still watch the same TV shows. We all still go to the same football matches. I can have these people as friends. It's not impossible. And I don't feel like I need to get out of this country anymore. It was just a very dark period that I was in when they came to work with me. So that's what the work we do is all about. We have a website which is freeheartsfreeminds.com. The scheme is supported entirely by public donations. There's a Patreon there or a one-time donation page if anybody wants to come and support us. We'd appreciate it. In addition to that, if you know somebody who's in need of our services, please direct them to that website. They can contact us. And if you're just interested in the type of work that we do, on the website there's a testimonial page where people we've worked with have said, like, well, actually, when I came here, this is how I was feeling. This is what I've learned, and this is how I am now. And it's quite a nice thing to read through to see how people have enacted positive change in their lives. If there are, I guess, ex-Muslims in the West who would like to work with me, I do that work privately. They can contact me through Facebook or Twitter or my website, which is integratedwellness.co.uk.